Good morning. So we're up to Siman Shin Mem Hey Seif Yud Gimel. What we're going to do today is Yud Gimel is very short. Then Yud Dalet is the main thing we're going to do today, which is the din of a Karmelis. So let's start with Yud Gimel. Chayrim Shebeksalim. You've got holes in the walls Klape Rishus Harabim, which face the Rishus Harabim. Imhem Gavoyim Lamala Mishleisha. If these holes in the walls facing the Rishus Harabim are higher than 3 tefachim from the ground, Einom Kirshus Harabim. They have not got the status of Rishus Harabim. Ela Nidainim Lefi Midoseim. It all depends on the actual size of the hole, what their measurements are. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Mem Hey, Klape Rishus Harabim, Rotzolema, De'einom Ovrim Klape Ponim. That means they're not going through, facing all the way inwards to the Rishus Hayachid. Dim Ovrim Klape Ponim. Because otherwise they would have the status of Rishus Hayachid if they're facing in towards Rishus Hayachid, or Kamesha Kosab Sif Dalet, like we said previously in Sif Dalet. The Malamias Mishleisha. Why? Says the Mishnah Berurah Memvov the Lamatz Mishleisha, because if they're less than 3 tefachim from the ground, Afilu Heim Rechavim Arbo Al Arbo, even if they're very wide, even more than 4 by 4 wide, Nechshavim Kakarka Rishus Harabim. They're dealt like just the floor of the Rishus Harabim, and they'll have the status of Rishus Harabim. They're bottled to the Rishus Harabim. For Chanal, Bereish Sif Yud, like we said previously, Lefi Midosehem, and so it depends. What is their status? It depends on their measurements. Says Rashi, says Mishnah Berurah, Bi'arti Le'el Besif Kotan Yud Aleph Ayin Sham. And there we said in Yud Aleph, it all depends on their measurements. So, for example, we said if it's Rechava Arba, then it's going to din of Karmelis, and if not, then it's the din of Makom P'tur. So Ayin Sham, exactly the details of the measurements, if it's a hole facing the Rishus Harabim. So if it faces the Rishus Hayachid, it will have the status of Rishus Hayachid. If it's facing the Rishus Harabim, it will have whatever the measurement would be. Depends on the measurements. But if it's lower than 3 tefachim, then it's bottled to the ground, and it will have the status of Rishus Harabim. We said less than 3 tefachim is just bottled to the ground. You're right, 3 tefachim we apply the rule of lovad in other areas, but here I don't think it's lovad. I think it's just that it's bottled to the ground. It's so low that it's just part of the ground. That's how Chazal look at it. Okay, now Yud Dalet. So now we're going to discuss about the Karmelis. So we said in the beginning there are 4 Rishuyos, which is the Rabim, Rishus Hayachid, Karmelis, and the Makom P'tur, and we're going through defining each one. So now we're going to define the Karmelis. Says the Mechaber, Eizu hi Karmelis. What is the definition of what is a Karmelis? Mokum she'ein hiluch l'rabim. It's a place where the rabbim, the public, don't pass through. Could go in yam, for example, like a sea. A sea has the din of a karmelis, or bika, a valley. Ve'itz tavinis, ve'itz tabo. What is that? Says the brackets. Pirush. It's tavinis mokum shelifnei hachunuyos. It's the area in front of shops. Sheyeshim shom hasoichrim, that the merchants, the owners of the shops sit there. Ve'itz tabo hu mokum shemanichim olav prakmatya. And the itztaba is the sort of the tables upon which you put the merchandise to sell. Shelifnei ha'amudim b'Rishus Harabim, which are in front of the pillars in the Rishus Harabim. Vehi rechava arba'a. It's 4 tefachim wide, v'gavoya mishleisha v'adasara, and it's between 3 and 10 tefachim. V'keren zovis hasmucha l'Rishus Harabim, or you've got like a corner which is adjacent to a Rishus Harabim. Kagoyin mavuos sheish lehem shalosh mechitzas. For example, you've got a mavui, you've got an alleyway which has 3 walls. Ve'ein lohem lechi a koira b'revius, and it doesn't have a lechi or a koira, the upright or the beam in the revius, because otherwise that would make it into Rishus Hayachid. Or Rishus Harabim shehu mukura. Another example of a Karmelis would be a Rishus Harabim which is roofed. It's got a ceiling. So imagine, Waterloo Station. You got there are thousands of people going through there every day. It's a massive Rishus Harabim, but it's all covered. So that therefore loses its status of a Rishus Harabim. Will be a din of a Karmelis. V'tel, or a hill sheyesh be'arba al arba. It's got 4 by 4 tefachim. Ve'ein agva asara, but it's not 10 tefachim high. Otherwise, it'll be Rishus Hayachid. V'chein choretz, so to a ditch, sheu arba al arba, ve'ein amak asara, and is not 10 tefachim deep. So all of those are examples of a Karmelis. Okay, says the Mishnah Berurah, Memches, Kagoin Yam. So the first example that the Mechaber gave as to what is a Karmelis is a sea. V'hu din nahar, and it doesn't only apply to a sea, it could be a river as well. V'afal gav, demaya lo mevatli mechitzasa, even though the water doesn't is not mevatel, doesn't negate the mechitzas, commercial kosavna b'sifid aleph, like we said previously. Yesh leima the chol charetz she'ena meshupa kadei sheyislakit gevei asar tefachim etoich arba amas. Whenever the slope, the incline of the sea or the riverbed doesn't go 10 tefachim deep within 4 amas, lo yaharish seyochit. Because if it did have a very steep incline, then it could be considered a Rosh Hashanah, because it goes down 4 amas. So it goes down 10 tefachim within 4 amas, so that's a very steep incline. But we're talking about a situation where the incline is not that steep, i.e. it does not go down 10 tefachim within 4 amas, and therefore lo have Rosh Hashanah. And the practical reality is that it's normally not so steep on the sea. It's like a gentle slope into the sea. It doesn't just suddenly drop down. And the Meiri explains the reason. Because the mechitzas are very distant from each other. I mean, think of the seashore. You've got one mechitza there, let's say, and then you've got another mechitza miles away. And therefore you can't include everything in between to be considered the Rosh Hashanah. And therefore, even if, let's say, it is very deep by the shore, by the bank of the river or the shore of the sea, because true, it may be a very steep incline in some situations, and that gives it the status of a proper mechitza. But if the other mechitza is miles away, then it cannot be considered a Rosh Hashanah. And the Nahar in the brackets, he says, imagine you've got a river, and one side of the river is not so far away from the other side. Nevertheless, given the the other side 3 and side 4, it could be miles away. You've got a very long river. So therefore, so therefore, a sea and a river does not have the status of a Rosh Hashanah, even if the incline is very steep, but it will always have the din of a Karmelis. And even according to the Magen Avraham, Midrabanan Karmelis have a bechol inyan, that Midrabanan a Karmelis always has that status, Midrabanan, now if you've got a pool of water in a Rosh Hashanah, and the highway just goes through this, you've got a pool of water in the highway, and the highway just keeps going. If this ditch of water is not 10 tefachim deep, then even though it's not 4 tefachim wide, and people in the streets, they sort of jump over it. They don't walk through this big deep puddle. Nevertheless, even though people don't walk over it, they don't walk through it, they walk over it, still it does not have the status of Rosh Hashanah. It does have the status of Rosh Hashanah. It does have the status of Rosh Hashanah. Even though people will jump over it, they don't want to walk through this thing. Nevertheless, it's considered part of the Rosh Hashanah. And so too, if you've got like a little plank which is going over this ditch of water in the street, nevertheless, have a Rosh Hashanah. It will still be considered the Rosh Hashanah. If it's not 10 tefachim deep and 4 tefachim wide, then it's still got the status of Rosh Hashanah. Of a Rashi daf kuf mashma, and Rashi in Erevin daf kuf implies k'tas to lo yav Rosh Hashanah, that actually would not be considered Rosh Hashanah elim kein harbe bnei adam ovrim b'seicha, unless people literally do walk through it. That's the difference between little boys and adults. If there's a nice puddle in the street, kids walk through it, adults walk around it. But if it's Rashi is of the opinion, it seems to imply that you've got to have some people walking through it for it to retain its status as a Rosh Hashanah. But if, of course, this rakak, this pool of water, is 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep, then have a Karmelis k'mayam. Then that's already considered like a sea, and therefore it will have the status not of a Rosh Hashanah but of a Karmelis. That's what the Rambam says. V'ayim b'prima godim the mistapik leima the rak lechumra have a karmelis. That is not a proper karmelis. It's just we're saying it's a karmelis lechumra, i.e. shlela hoitzi metoichel rish hayachid. That you shouldn't take it from there into rish hayachid. Avol minatayra rish hayachidu. But minatayra, if it's 4 tefachim wide and 10 tefachim deep, it could have the status or would have the status of rish hayachid. Okay. Now the next thing that has got the status of a karmelis, aside from a sea and a river, is a bika, a field or a meadow or something like that. Says the Mishnah Berurah, bika mokum sodas she'ein mukaf mechitzas. You've got fields which are sort of open expanses which are not surrounded by mechitzas. That would be a karmelis. And then we said the area, the itztavonis and the itztaba, which are these places where the merchant sits and their merchandise sits, that is also considered a karmelis. And then we said shelifnei ha'amudim b'shus harabim, amudim ha'imdim b'shus harabim. These are pillars which stand in the public streets and public areas. V'toilim bohem hatagrim pragmatia, and merchants they hang their goods on these pillars. Ve'etzlam hoyu ha'etztabois, and then you've got these tables just next door or just near them. V'hinei midivrei ha'mechaber shelo zocher din debein ha'amudim. The mechaber doesn't talk about the areas between the pillars. Mashma desvirle, the implication is the bein hamudim atzman nidzain rishus harabim, that the areas themselves are considered the rishus harabim. Kadas Rambam. Avarov hapoiskim poskud degam bein hamudim, that even the areas between the pillars, afal gav the zimin darsi rabim, even though sometimes the public they walk in between them, nevertheless kiven she'ein hahiluch noyach kolkach, since it's not such a smooth walk, you're sort of walking in a crooked way. That others argue with the Rambam and say that the areas between these pillars in a public place are actually have the din of a karmelis. Okay. And they're wide, so too with this area where he places the merchandise. Okay, nun base. So this is going on. Rechava arba v'guvaya shleisha ad asara. So it says the Mishnah Berurah, the be'ena rechava arba he mokum patur, because if it's less than 4x4 tefachim, then it has the status not of a karmelis but of a mokum patur. The be'ena guvaya shleisha, and if it's not more than 3 tefachim from the ground, he rishus harabim. Then it's like we said, bottled to the ground, and it's got a status of rishus harabim. V'im guvaya asara he rishus hayachid, and if it's 4x4 and more than 10 tefachim, then it has the status of rishus hayachid, like we've discussed. Va'ad asara, up to 10 tefachim, mamayri b'she'ein rabim mekasfin oleho, that the rabbim don't lean on it. Ti'ilav hochi, because otherwise, but tisha, then if it's 9, like we said yesterday, it would have the status of rishus harabim. V'chein mitisha v'ad asara l'das hayesh omrim hanal b'sif yud harishus harabim. That there was one opinion, I think Magen Avraham, we said yesterday that if it's between 9 and 10 and Rabbim Mekasvin Olov, then it's got the status of Rishus Rabbim. So therefore, we're talking. It says Ad Asara. We're talking about a situation where Rabbim Ein Mekasvin Olov. Okay, Nun Daled. Kagain, we said Mavua Sheyesh Lem Shalosh Mechitzas. So you've got these alleyways which have got 3 mechitzas, but they don't have a lechi or a kaira on the 4th one. V'yesh Oid Pirish says the Mishnah Berurah Nun Daled. V'yesh Oid Pirish Rashi. You've got another situation where you've got, for example, a house, and you've got the karka, which is sort of abutting the rishus harabim. Now, if you look, I don't know if all of you have got the Dirshu ones yet, but if you look in footnote 40, he's got a picture of that. So you've got 2 houses on either side, then you've got a house in the middle, but the house in the middle is recessed a little bit, it's sort of pulled back, so the front area is sort of abutting the rishus harabim, if you can picture it. So he says here, and as a result, you've actually got 3 mechitzas, because you've got the side of the house on the right, the side of the house on the left, and then you've got the side of the front of your house, the middle house. So he says, he quotes the Shoina Halachas, Reb Chaim Kanievsky b'Shem HaChazon Ish, Shelefi HaShitas she'ein hiluch rabim mevatles hamechitza, you're talking shedina k'rishus hayochid. It could have the status of rishus hayochid. Ochein k'sheyesh sodos mitzidei osa knisa, but if there are fields opposite this entrance, then it will certainly be considered the Karmelis, because there are no proper mechitzas. Okay, let's just finish off this sif. Inami, Bais sheponov omed ba'alachson. For example, a house which is on an angle, shezovis echot smuchel Rabim. One side is adjacent to Rabim. V'hashen is meshucha mishus Rabim lifnim, and the other one is sort of pulled back from the Rabim. V'zovis haboletes makeves Rabim milikonis lehedja. But the angle, the projected part is now preventing people from passing through lehedja b'toich knisa shazovis acheres. So therefore, it doesn't have the status of rishus Rabim. And the fourth wall, the Ramah carried on and said, or the Mechaber carried on and said, hasn't got a lechi. Says the Mishnah Berurah Nun Hey, to have a lechi, because if there was a lechi, what would the story be? It would be Rish Sayochid. Hay Rish Sayochid Gomor Min HaTorah. It would be a proper Rish Sayochid, L'inin Zrika. Sha'zorik Mishus Rabim L'Soicha Chayev. Because you're throwing from Rishus Harabim into a proper Rishus Hayochid. V'gam shoyah mutar l'talta b'soicha b'kol Rishus Hayochid. Moreover, if he's got 3 mechitzas plus a lechi or a koira on the fourth one, then it's got a proper status of Rishus Hayochid, and you could carry within it. To kaimel on lechi mishum mechitza, it's proper. It's got a din of a mechitza. Va'afilu yahav yisham rak koira dahavi rak mishum hekera. And even if the koira is there just as a heka, as a marker, I'll call upon him l'kula am Rishus Hayochid hulin tiltul. Everyone would agree it would have the status of Rishus Hayochid in terms of carrying. The talta b'soicha kamei b'shar Hayochid, you can carry within it like any other Rishus Hayochid. V'chol zehu rak l'das Rambam. All of the above is according to Rambam. Aval l'shar poskim alidei shalosh mechitzas nase Rishus Hayochid gomah min HaTorah. But according to other opinions, even without this fourth wall, you've got 3 proper mechitzas. That makes it a proper Rishus Hayochid min HaTorah. V'hazorik Rishus Rabim l'soicha chayiv. And therefore, if you throw from Rishus Rabim into it 3 mechitzas without a fourth wall, according to the other opinions, not the Rambam, then it has a proper status of Rishus Hayochid, and therefore you're throwing from a Rabban to Yochid, you're going to be chayiv. However, without this fourth wall of a lechi or a koira, it's got a status of a Karmelis, means Rabbanon at least. Shehu koira. Then we said if you've got a massive Rishus Rabim, but it's roofed, it's got a ceiling like Waterloo Station or something, then that loses its status of Rishus Rabim. It's got a din of a Karmelis. Because it's no longer like Diglei Midbar, because there was no roof in the Midbar. It wasn't roofed above. And then lastly, we said Nun Zayin, you've got a hill which is 4x4 tefachim, but is not 10 tefachim tall, or you've got a ditch which is 4x4 wide, but is not 10 tefachim deep, then it has the status of a Karmelis. The ilav hochi have a mokum p'tur, because if it's not 4x4 tefachim, and it's less than 10 tefachim, then it's just got a din of a mokum p'tur, because the lakame b'sif test. That will get to defining a mokum p'tur. Ve'ena gva asara, v'im hoy b'tzimtzum tisha, ayin le'el b'sif yud, because if it's exactly 9, then that depends on what we said previously in sif yud. Okay.